On the previous segment of Socialism and Capitalism, Ingo Schmidt looked at the problems of national and global capitalism, as well as the problems of national and global socialism. He also reminded us of the failures of totalitarian socialism as well as the failures of Western social democracies. On this concluding segment of Ingo Schmidt's lecture on socialism, he talks about concrete alternatives to capitalism.
To be sure, there were people before me who figured out that something is wrong with organized communism and organized social democracy, and there were many of them, and they were called the New Left. They did notice, well, there's something wrong to always call for the state. If things don't go the way you want, you have to have empowerment of the marginalized, oppressed, and exploited people of the world. However, as good as they were at critiquing the administered world that they saw right in front of their eyes in the West, welfare capitalism, and in the East, Soviet communism, they also were very poor at suggesting an alternative. They had no ideas, and most of them were not interested in economics in the first place. They just said, oh, all these state regulations, that's bad, people can do it for themselves. And since they didn't answer the question how they would do it for themselves, the neoliberal free marketeers walked in and said, well, I can tell you the market will solve your problem. Now, what I'm suggesting here is that against their best intentions, the New Left activists became door openers for neoliberal capitalism. The kind of capitalism starting in the 1980s where we stopped thinking about alternatives. Now, I'm talking endlessly about history here. Why am I doing that? Why does that matter? Well, anytime there's a serious crisis, people look for something else, can't see something else, they start looking back. And then all these images that people thought were gone are popping up again. If you ask somebody, do a brainstorming, what's socialism, what is communism, all these things that I talked about are front page again. And they're not very encouraging. I understand that young activists are not very much drawn to them. There's so much disappointment. And also all these bad examples of people young activists know about. They were radical before they turned gray, but now they talk a totally different line. That's not a great advertisement. Just look at the things you hear from ex-activists. There's the road of escapism, from Mao to muesli. People who carried around Mao posters one day and now they advertise muesli as saving Mother Earth. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you what neoliberal free marketeers say all along. Everything ends up for sale. Mao posters and muesli boxes. Then you have the nostalgia people talking about, it's kind of the, where have all the good days gone activists. Now that's not very attractive to young ones to hear how good the days were in the past if they don't have that past but still don't see a way forward. What does it tell us about this world? Well, socialism is a thing of the past. There may be a socialist past, but there's no future, just like the punkers suggested in the late 70s. And then there's the morally most bankrupted breed of former activists, the from speak out to sell out people, the ones who always know best. When there's an activist meeting, they know everything better. You can't critique them because they already know everything. And then they turn around and they still know everything best. Just what they know best now is the free market. It just doesn't fit today's world anymore because the free market is not very attractive. Now, we have to look for alternatives. And I suggest to draw one lesson from some of the movements that started in the 60s that didn't do all the Marxist analysis that I am doing here, that did self-empowerment. That was big in the women's movement. It was also big in the civil rights movement, where they wouldn't just analyze the intricacies of imperialism and race, where they would just say, black is beautiful. And that's where black power comes from. Now, when have you seen a socialist the last time saying socialism is sexy, communism is cool, and the revolution rocks? I assume it's been quite a while. But it's important to be in the right mindset for all the Marxist analysis that's still necessary. But if we don't have the self-confidence of saying socialism is sexy, communism is cool, and the revolution rocks, we won't make very much sense of the world as it is today, at least not in the sense of changing it for the better, meaning moving towards socialism. And that brings me to my last 3 points, which are actually 3 points of which I think around which we should structure prospective discussions about socialism. One is academically known as agency, in popular language. Who's doing it? The old answer obviously was the working class, and I think it should also be the answer in the future. If the working class doesn't do it, nobody else will do it. What is crucial, though, is that we understand that if you talk about working class, you talk about a highly diverse group of people. There are lots of activists running around very different social movements talking about diversity. I suggest if you look for diversity, look at the working class. You have men, women, black, yellow, red, yes, and also some whites. They are all working class. They are Jacks and Jones of all trades. And if we don't get these people together, all expressing their specific concerns, and everybody has specific concerns, but at the same time learning to identify common goals and strategies, then there's no future for socialism. Then we can keep on talking about it next year at the next World Peace Forum teach-in, but there won't be real change unless we contribute to the building of a working class movement. And that working class movement has to be global in scale. And that brings me to my second of my last 3 points. Socialism in the past was very much focused on the state. That's true for social democracy, that's true for communism, and the New Left, as I said, was very critical about it for very good reasons, I'd like to say, and I think we have to pick up the critique on the state that was advocated by New Left activists, even though it puts us in a very awkward and difficult position, because neoliberals constantly attack the welfare state. Now, naturally, we do defend all kinds of social protections of workers where they still exist, and naturally we aim at extending such securities. The crux of the matter is when the state is in charge, it's also the people who are in charge of the state who control all the social security, and basically that comes down to the question who controls the money. All the rollbacks of the welfare state that we have seen over the last 30 to 40 years now came in the name of reining in the deficit, having solid public finances. It's always about money. And if you go back very far into history, you will see that the very early labor movements, they had their own, they had their friendly societies, they had strike funds. Unions today also have strike funds. And think about it, as much as still existing unions are part of the state apparatus, and as much as that is a problem, a strike fund is still controlled by the union. If you have a democratic union, you have democratically controlled money. Why can't we run all kinds of social security systems on the basis of workers' control, owned by workers and controlled by workers? Leave the state out of that equation, because as soon as the state comes in, it's also the guys who control the money, and behind those you have corporate interests. So being critical of the state, and the state also has a tendency to wrap itself into national flags, and then you're back to 100 years ago, where in the name of the fatherland people go at each other's throats. In the name of peace, I suggest to abandon any idea of being part of a nation as a good thing, be a good internationalist as socialists always had been, at least in words in the past. And we should make that a thing of the future, just as in reality. My final point is industrialism, the idea that economic growth is a key issue to have socialism or communism. I do understand there are lots of people who need better housing, they need schools, they need doctors, all kinds of things. And in a certain way you could say, well, that's growth because you have more doctors, more teachers, etc., etc. But don't make economic growth measured in gross domestic product, basically expressed in monetary terms, don't make that a benchmark for the successes and for the building of socialism of any kind. Always look at the interests of humans, and some of us humans may face some difficult choices, particularly we in the rich northern countries. Yes, even poor people use up natural resources way out of proportion with what people in the global south are doing, and we have to urgently invent totally different ways of living, but also totally different ways of producing, because this is, I will close on critiquing Karl Marx, and as socialists you understand, that's something you're not supposed to do, but I will do it anyways. Because building on Marx, socialists for a long time, sometimes they were critiqued by anarchists, and the anarchists had a point on that one, were arguing capitalism develops the so-called forces of production, meaning they're all the factories and the roads and you name it. Then we take it over and run it on a more equitable basis. Yeah, that's a great idea. Just the forces of production as they have developed since the days of Karl Marx are forces of destruction to Mother Earth. And this is an ethical principle to stop the destruction of Mother Earth, but if you are not interested in ethical principles whatsoever, probably you have enough self-interest to understand you are part of Mother Earth, I'm part of Mother Earth too. It's a question of life and death to stop this destruction of Mother Earth, and it requires us to take over the existing productive capacities of this Earth, to abandon them and start building new ones so that we can live in peace with Mother Earth and with each other. And on this moral note, I will end this talk, and thank you for your patience and your questions.
One of the prescriptions he recommends is for citizens to become self-confident and proud of being socialists. Another suggestion is to prioritize universal socialism over political nationalism. He urges us to reinvent the system of production of goods and services with a full consideration of ecological sustainability. And finally, his recommendation of agency, the one I like the most, questions who is going to develop the political transformation. Some political party, maybe some enlightened political leader, or is it you and I? Ingo Schmidt answered a few questions from the floor. One of them was, where on earth has socialism ever worked?
In the times when there were strong, organized socialist movements, labor movements, coming back to 100 years ago, before there were the defeats, there was nobody saying, well, if I can't see socialism in somewhere else, I don't believe it's possible. They were just, they had the confidence, we are moving forward, and along the way we will figure out how to do it. So, and I think it's part of the lack of self-confidence, which I'm not blaming on you because you're much younger than I am. So it's always a failure of the older generation not to kind of having the self-confidence to pass it on to the next generation. So that's the blame we have to take. But I think it's crucial. That's why I had this point about empowerment. Socialism is sexy, don't forget that. Because that's the only way that allows us to think about socialism as something that would be different from Sweden and Cuba, which is not to say that we shouldn't look at any of these countries. We should look at everything that ever was accomplished by labor movements. And yes, in Cuba and Sweden, they accomplished more than in some other places. But we also have to look at all the failures where they really fucked it up. No, we can't shy away from it. We have to take a close look and see what went wrong, why it went wrong, because that's the only way how we possibly have a chance to do a better job next time. This comparison between the United States and the Soviet Union. I haven't read this book, but I've seen it. I find that a fascinating idea just from some observations I made knowing a little bit about Eastern Germany, which was part of the Soviet Empire, and parts of my family was living there, so I have some ideas how that worked. And I live under actually existing capitalism. I also have some ideas how that works, and I do see some similarities. The delusions of Soviet planners in terms of we have these numbers and they clearly show how we are moving forward. Every worker in the Soviet Empire knew it was a lie, and some of the planners probably cynically would have said off the record, everybody knows that. But that kind of delusion is even topped by Wall Street delusionalists. If you see investment bankers, they truly believe the numbers that they present you, and they are truly shocked when the whole thing falls apart. And if you think there was too much bureaucracy in the Soviet Union, bang on, there sure was. But I know other places where there's so much, there's too much bureaucracy. I mean, what do you think all these corporate towers are, all these banks? Well, if that's not a bureaucracy, if that's not entirely useless, then I don't know what a bureaucracy is, and I also don't know what useless is. And if the bureaucracy in the Soviet Union was part of the reason why it eventually fell down, then I'm very optimistic that actually existing capitalism is pretty close to collapse. Just one, because peak oil was mentioned. The downside of that is we might find ourselves in a situation where we have to clean up the mess that these guys produce, which makes it so much harder to build something positive for the future.
A framework for apolitical evolution is presented on this little booklet, Perpetual Direct Democracy, published by Amazon.com. You can also read it online at pacific.ca.